Hey everybody, welcome to the second ever Sports Tech Live video summary. So this is for July 17th, issue number 88 of the newsletter that's going out later this evening. So we're going to start with the streaming wars, going to keep it a bit shorter and snappier this time, based on some feedback from some of you from last week's one. So looking at the top story, UFC from Fight Island says 1.3 million pay-per-view. So huge event for them. Obviously, it's kind of part of their comeback tour to get international fighters involved because they can't fly them into the US for fights in the US. So 1.3 million buys on their pay-per-view, which is a huge number for them. It's not quite the record, but very, very good numbers for them. It kind of proves that their model's kind of working to get people to stump up the cash to watch. I think the Fight Island thing didn't really kind of live up to the hype. I think everyone's kind of picturing, idyllic tropical islands, fighting on the beach. But yeah, it was very well put together as a production. So big returns there for Dana White and the UFC, and obviously ESPN, because the UFC is on ESPN Plus in the US, so it was on BT here in Ireland. So check that out. Some very good fights, very entertaining. And there's more coming up this weekend. I think they were doing 3 events in the matter of a week, so they're really trying to gear up and run events to kind of catch up on their schedule. Then the second story, OTT focus for Premier League as Peacock gets bulk of live games. So Peacock, another streaming service from NBC. So I think they've obviously got a lot of live television, a lot of live sports. Having the Premier League is a very nice asset to have. Obviously, it's not one of the biggest sports in the US, but I think for a newly launched OTT platform, I think it gives them a great base to build off of. So I think they're giving 4 Premier League games for free, and then I think there's $4.99 if you have ads, or $9.99 a month without the ads. There's some controversy down here, and another story about losing movies a day after its full debut. So I think this is all to do with just the rights that are involved with different TV shows and movies that they kind of under contract for a certain amount of time. So I guess a few have kind of fallen foul that they were still under NBC's stable when they were launched, and obviously Peacock has been under limited release since about April time to certain viewers in the US. So all these movies would have been there, no problem, but they've all kind of been removed or about to be removed. So not the most positive stories, but obviously they've got huge things in their stable. Obviously we mentioned about the Premier League rights, but they also are the creators of Friends and The Office, which are 2 of the most watched things on Netflix every year. So they'll be moving over at some time in the future when deals with Netflix runs out. So another story related to Peacock also mentions HBO Max. So they're in a standoff with Roku and Fire TV by Amazon to get onto that platform. So kind of started off earlier this year, kind of musing about the different kind of hardware providers for these OTT platforms. So the likes of Roku, Apple TV, Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV, essentially the replacements to the set-top boxes that come with cable and satellite providers. So they're now the gatekeepers, so they need to do deals with the likes of Peacock or HBO Max to get them onto the platform. So it's very interesting. I was going to do a longer piece, but there wasn't too much reaction in terms of emails coming in when I was kind of speculating that I might. I definitely think it's something I will go back to. Obviously this story is still kind of running out, so I think it would be good to get an update and see where the numbers lie, because obviously Amazon is a household name. Roku, they're not a tech giant, whereas the other ones are, like Apple TV and Google Chromecast. So I think Roku, at one point anyway, earlier this year, was the leading kind of manufacturer of these new OTT platforms from a hardware perspective. I think Amazon probably cut into that given their sales that they were doing during lockdown, and I picked up a new Fire TV as a result, replacing my first gen one, which wasn't quite living up to expectations anymore. So moving on, the Nielsen ratings blunder has network execs searching for alternatives. So obviously ratings are a big thing for television, but also for live television. And this is kind of coming at it from sporting perspective. So it's Nielsen's out-of-home ratings blunder in particular. So it was supposed to be launched in the fall, but now it's not coming for a reason that I'm not 100% sure on. But obviously a lot of the big TV companies are not too happy with that. So another Sportico one. So again, kind of building off last week's one, I think they're going to be a source that we use quite a lot. So ratings, MLS is back, PGA Tour. So the ratings for them are back. So I think one of the opening matches had about a 450,000 watch rate in the US for the MLS. So not a record by any stretch, but definitely good to see the MLS back to help soccer kind of continue its momentum in the US. And there's a big jump for the PGA Tour in Detroit. So I think golf has kind of come out of this quite nicely as well. So Fox taps Sports Cloud for AI tech to automate content management workflows. So we've seen a number of these kind of deals. Obviously, it's kind of a battle really between Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, and Microsoft Azure. So they're all kind of doing deals with either the media companies or the leagues directly themselves. This is another one. Obviously, Fox Sports is a massive provider of sports content in the US. So they've gone with Google Cloud. And then Wave TV partners with IMG for expanded social content offering. So IMG, we cover them a number of times. They're the owners, or under the same umbrella as the UFC, provide a lot of OTT technology, a lot of gambling stats and information and odds. So they're partnering with Wave TV, who cover World's Strongest Man, EuroLeague, which is basketball. So I think they're going to continue to do deals. IMG do deals with the PGA Tour and some of the tennis brands like ATP Tour and stuff, but they seem to be kind of going after underserved sporting properties, not really kind of playing with the NFL and NBA and the Premier League. No doubt they have certain things going there. From a content production, I think the Premier League Productions is run by IMG out of the UK, who kind of do studio shows for the different broadcasters around the world, kind of a studio setup. So moving on now to gambling. So will COVID change the face of online gambling? Very good piece. I think first time using this source, but it kind of goes through the different scenarios that have kind of come about as a result of the COVID lockdown. Obviously, a lot of casinos kind of shut down. The US is kind of legalizing a lot of online gambling. So the kind of general graduation from casinos to more digital online gambling. Obviously, that would be sports and casino. So very interesting to see and how that will progress as we continue. So the number of UK problem gamblers soars during lockdown. So that's a very worrying stat. Obviously, a lot of the kind of reporting from the gambling side would be positive and the opportunities that arise from legalizing gambling. But obviously there is a downside. So monthly interactions rise from 30 to 1,000, which is very, very troubling. I think there's a lot to be learned from legalized gambling in Europe for the US as they legalize, and obviously gambling does come with a lot of health warnings. It's fun to a certain point until there's an addiction and a problem. So I think that's important that we kind of raise that as well. So former Stars exec DraftKings SB Tech face outright concussion in platform migration. So obviously, SB Tech and DraftKings are now essentially one and the same. So how those technologies kind of work together and how they play together is a big question mark. Obviously, there's a lot of money behind both companies, so I think they'll have the resources they need to kind of make that transition. But technology migrations are difficult at the best of times, but when you try and merge two companies, it becomes very, very difficult. I think this is a nice little picture here to kind of summate that. Will they be using duct tape to kind of make things work and having patches? But I think that would be a very long transition to migrate the two into one. I think when Paddy Power and Betfair merged, it was a similar kind of migration kind of issues. Not sure how long that took, but yeah, it takes a long time. And then kind of an unusual one. So California man accused of gambling COVID relief funds in Las Vegas. So as part of the kind of relief funds, I think he acquired 9 million in coronavirus relief funds, and then he used some of the money to gamble in Las Vegas. So a guy taking advantage of the dire situation that everyone's in for his own personal gain. So obviously being arrested and ordered to be held without bond. So obviously a lot of fraud committed and very unethical practices. So that's our gambling wrap up. Moving to esports, very interesting piece here from Esports Insider about when should esports investors realistically expect a return on investment. So obviously esports has kind of been blowing up over the last number of years. It's a thing that we cover quite extensively every week. So obviously, investors are obviously looking for a return on investment. So great piece here, kind of talking to some venture capitalists, and when is the realistic timeline for getting a return on that investment. Kind of related in a way. So esports revenue outlook gets another downgrade as pandemic halts live tournaments. So obviously, esports isn't immune to the shutting off of fans from live events, and I think that is a big money maker for the esports world, especially for the leagues and teams that have got a lot of traction over the last 2 years. So obviously not being able to have that in-stadium experience where they're selling tickets, merch, all the concessions, really puts a dent in some of their business models. Obviously they have the digital and fits perfectly in the digital realm, but they're not immune to it either. So FIBA Esports Open generates 5 million social media views. So FIBA, it's kind of the international version for basketball. So they ran a tournament, and some great numbers, especially for countries like Spain. I think they had a big impression there, and so I'd imagine they're going to be doing that a lot more in the future. So how to get ahead of the game. Gaming as a media channel. So a very interesting piece, especially with a lot of sports brands, teams, leagues, federations moving to the gaming space. So how to kind of leverage what you have, and moving forward have a plan to kind of execute your gaming strategy. There was an interesting talk at one of the conferences I was at a couple of weeks ago. Guy from ESL, one of the big kind of esports leagues. And he was basically trying to make the point that your gaming strategy comes before your esports strategy, and before you have a gaming strategy you need to actually have a game or a simulator. So I think that's obviously kind of step one. So I've got some interesting news that I'll release in a couple of weeks kind of based on that, but essentially it's around the Drone Racing League. They do have a simulator which they use for talent identification and for building their ecosystem and building their fan base. So we'll be getting a look at that simulator. I'm terrible at flying drones, but I'll definitely have a go in the simulator where I'm not potentially breaking a very expensive piece of equipment. But it's great to see them kind of starting with the game, almost that it's there from the very start, because it is the Drone Racing League is very much kind of an esports, real world sports mashup in terms of just the very basics of the game. It's mechanically driven drone, using a controller, so it lends itself very well to the esports world and the gaming world. So I'll have that to share with you over the next couple of weeks. Then looking at the CDL New York Home Series most viewed event this season, so the Call of Duty League, so 115,000 concurrent viewers on YouTube, so between Chicago and Atlanta. So it's the highest for a single match this season. So it's good news for them. Obviously, Call of Duty did an exclusive deal with YouTube for their live streaming. So YouTube definitely becoming a lot more active in the esports world. So Defiant Ultra owners to build esports arena in Toronto. So plans to build a 7 to 10,000 seater arena and exhibition space in Toronto. Obviously kind of planning for when live events kind of come back, but last year we covered a bunch of different arenas being built all around the world, primarily in North America, Europe and Asia. to kind of host these events that built from the ground up with esports in mind and not kind of retrofitting an existing arena. So very interesting to see, and obviously puts Toronto in a good position for esports moving forward. And then X Player organizes a virtual NCAA tournament. So former Louisville player organizing a kind of a March Madness with other former players, and I think some current players as well. Obviously, there was no March Madness this year, so good to see someone taking the initiative and an X Player at that to kind of come together to put on a NCAA, which is the college tournament, to put that out there. So moving on to content. The New Jersey Devils here, a good piece on them of what they've done as a content play during lockdown. So doing a lot of things, NHL 20 streams, live draft lottery, basically pushing out content where they could leverage what they had, using the players quite a bit. So a good kind of use case there of what to do when there's no live sports, and that's what all sports teams kind of assume is their 90% of content that they're going to be pushing out. So very good piece there. So the NBA's YouTube generation documents life in Orlando coronavirus bubble. So obviously NBA is one of the sports leagues in the US that are using Disney's facilities in Orlando to host their events that are upcoming. But a lot of the stars that are involved, a lot of the teams are kind of documenting life behind the scenes of how they're going to be running that. I think it's scheduled for the 30th or 31st of July, NBA's return, but there's a little piece later on that kind of has an alternative plan as well in case things dramatically change. Inter Milan partner with Twitter in premium content deal. So the Twitter network have their Amplify program, and Inter Milan are one of their partners now in that. So it's a way for Inter Milan to monetize. So we covered the story last week about Twitter potentially having a subscription service kind of tied to their future. Obviously, Twitter had a huge kind of scandal this week in terms of hacked accounts of very high profile leaders of the world and leaders of tech companies like Elon Musk, Joe Biden. The list is kind of endless. But this is a very interesting piece, and I don't know if this kind of part of that subscription model that was kind of mentioned, that obviously all teams pretty much are on the Twitter platform. So is this kind of part of that where they can fans of Inter Milan in this case could subscribe via Twitter to premium content coming down. Not 100% sure, but definitely interesting to keep an eye on. Then moving on to marketing social. I didn't put in the piece about Twitter's kind of hack. News is still kind of breaking on that, and it's not very relevant to the world of sports, but I'll definitely cover it if it does move in that direction. So Gatorade tapped up some high-profile players about the return, so definitely check out that commercial. It's pretty entertaining. Omnicom's 20 million podcast deal bodes well for publishers. So Omnicom, kind of one of those company names that you've never heard of, but they're obviously have huge pockets, deep pockets for advertising and marketing spend. So 20 million being done with Spotify for podcast ad deals. Very similar kind of piece here about podcast ad revenue to grow almost 15% in 2020. So there was kind of a dip in a lot of podcast listening when people are working from home, that they didn't have the kind of commute to and from work where they'd usually listen to a podcast. So I think there was a bit of unsettling tension there. But I think they've kind of come through the worst of it with the 15% year-over-year growth to $1 billion in 2020. So very interesting. And some sports teams have started their podcasting as a result of COVID, which is great to see. Sponsors take heart. Sports teams will reach fans with or without attendance. So I think that's been obviously the biggest disruption to the sporting calendar. Obviously, when games are cancelled, that's probably a bigger disruption. But with games returning, sponsors will still have the engagement and I guess the viewership of fans that will be tuning in digitally or via traditional broadcast. So I think the relationship is still there between teams, leagues, and the fans. So a deal that broke just after I published last week's newsletter. So it's been speculated for a while that UFC are going to move away from Reebok, and they've teamed up with Venom for their new deal, which will begin in April 2021. So Venom is a completely new name to me, but obviously they've outbid others to set up a deal with the UFC. So I think that will automatically increase the pay that goes to each of the fighters. Obviously there was a lot of controversy over the Reebok deal, that everyone had to wear Reebok. The remuneration wasn't great, especially for the biggest stars who could probably land their own kind of merch deals. So I think this will probably go some way to kind of appeasing those fighters. Fanatics kind of strikes partnership deal with Carolina Panthers, MLS Charlotte. So yeah, we've covered Fanatics quite a bit. Any kind of retail or e-commerce kind of section we've had in the past has probably always included a Fanatics deal. They've been absolutely relentless in their partnerships with some of the sport's biggest players. Obviously, last week we covered a story of Real Madrid and New York Yankees and the Dallas Cowboys, having their own kind of rival kind of partnership to Fanatics. But Fanatics, for every other team, it seems to be a great partnership that a lot of teams are taking up to allow Fanatics kind of manage the merchandise and the e-commerce and retail part of their business. So a lot of COVID-19 stories this week. I've tried to not mention a lot of them over the last kind of few weeks. I think there's been a COVID burnout. Obviously it's been ongoing now for 4 months, so I tried to keep it down, but a lot of interesting ones this week. So NFL unveils Oakley mouth shield to combat coronavirus. So obviously there's a lot of kind of speculation about NFL and its return. Obviously it's a very physical sport, a lot of players involved. So going some ways with you can't really make it out in the picture here, but kind of a mouth guard. Some players wear the visors to protect their eyes, but this is a full kind of plastic kind of insert that goes inside the helmet. So remains to be seen whether players are comfortable in this. Obviously there's kind of technology involved, so it doesn't kind of fog up, but it'd be interesting to see what the players think, because ultimately they're going to be the ones using this technology. Good piece from the NPR about college sports falling victim to coronavirus and the financial stresses. A lot of leagues are cancelling their fall programs. The Pac-12 is just going conference only, that they're not playing teams outside of their conference. So it's definitely going to be a very different college sporting calendar. Obviously, the football season is the jewel in the crown when it comes to fall. NCAA basketball tournament kind of takes over in the spring, but obviously there's a lot of uncertainty right now with the college sports calendar. The Ivy League has put it all on hold until at least January. Stanford discontinued 11 of its 36 varsity programs, so very much in flux right now for college sports in the US. And then moving on, NBA documents show it's considering delaying the 2021 season to March if a solution to COVID-19 becomes a possibility. So I don't expect this to happen, but it's interesting to know that the NBA are kind of taking these precautionary plans seriously. So I think we will see the return of NBA at the end of this month, but they were very quick to kind of shut down the league. And obviously taking every precaution necessary in case that changes. So Republic FC boards have changed to convert empty stands into art gallery for good. So obviously we've seen a lot of cardboard cutouts and different iterations of that for stadiums to bring fans closer to it. Obviously some of the South Korean ones kind of made headlines with the sex dolls in the stands, but this one is for good. So the north stands will be featuring artists from local black youth organizations in the US. So not a massive team by any stretch of the imagination, but they're doing their bit with a very interesting concept, which I think will hit a lot of good points, with each piece being auctioned off with money going to charity. So I think that's a very good iteration of the kind of cardboard cutout found in the stadium. So obviously this week, there's been huge kind of controversy over the name of the Washington Redskins for a long time. There's been huge pressure a couple of years ago. It seems to die down, but obviously in the last kind of couple of months, it's been put right back under the spotlight. With a couple of weeks ago, a lot of companies that sponsor or are associated with the Washington Redskins, calling for a change, and the piece down here, the 15 days that forever changed Washington's NFL team, really good kind of blow by blow of the on July 1st, the investors kind of started that ball rolling, and now it's the name's gone, or going I should say, but it's not without its own kind of nuances and interesting facts. There's another piece as well here that there might be an expose coming out on the Washington Redskins, so I guess that's something that's yet to be released, but it doesn't sound very good anyway, what has been kind of speculated. There was another piece as well that doesn't look like I've actually included it, but I'll be pushing that out in the newsletter. But essentially a lawyer from Virginia has registered a lot of potential names for the Washington Redskins new name. So the Washington Red Tails, Washington Monuments, he trademarked a lot of them. So that might slow down Washington's name change. Possibly going to hold out for a buyout for the rights to those new names. So obviously they have to have a really quick turnaround. The season's going to be starting, in the fall. So obviously they need to kind of get cracking. There's going to be a lot of money spent to get that new brand up and running. So good few more piece stories this week. So Racing Point have been accused by Renault of kind of breaking rules. I think everyone's kind of calling the Racing Point the pink Mercedes this year, using essentially the winning Mercedes from last year's F1 championship. So there are different kind of rules. The kind of long story short of it is that teams can outsource some of the manufacture and design of the components that go into the car, but it can't be from a competitor. So I think Renault are accusing them of using Mercedes as that kind of third party outsourcing design and manufacture of some of their components, which would contravene the rules. So it's a very interesting kind of debate between two of the teams that are kind of competing for the kind of mid-table, kind of like the fourth best team behind the major racing teams of Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari. So that will kind of run and run, I'd imagine. Racing Point say they're innocent, that they haven't broken any rules, but it remains to be seen what happens. So CBS and Tony Stewart team up for a new racing series to debut next year. So again, we've seen Extreme E as well as launched. Last week there was an e-scooter racing tournament announced. So there's a lot of movement in and around new sporting or motorsport, new leagues, new formats. So it's very interesting to see. So Extreme E and AFC Energy to pioneer zero emission vehicle charging. It's obviously kind of part of the interesting part of Extreme E is that it is another electric vehicle racing format similar to Formula E, but obviously kind of more of the Dakar rally kind of side of things. So very interesting piece if you're interested in green technology, kind of using hydrogen fuel cells as part of the tech stack that they're going to be using. Obviously every car is going to be zero emission, but they're using hydrogen fuel cells to actually charge the batteries is a very interesting development in that technology. And I think some of the technology that's being developed here for a motorsport series could definitely kind of fall down into consumer technology in the future. So very interesting to watch. And then there's been a couple of stories about the sale of the Mets. So it's going to be happening pretty soon. Two mystery bidders have been revealed. A-Rod has been a very prominent bidder in this. So yeah, nothing has been decided yet, but I'd imagine it's going to go for big money. With some consortiums kind of pooling cash to buy the New York Mets, which obviously aren't as prominent as the New York Yankees, but huge following, global fan base. Baseball isn't my sport, but it's definitely a behemoth in the US and in countries like Japan, Taiwan. There's definitely a number of countries around the world that are passionate about baseball. So the teams don't get sold too often, and obviously being a New York-based team kind of comes with extra kind of bonus and kudos. So that is this week's one. So about half an hour. Kind of want it to be shorter, kind of moving forward, and so I'll definitely work on the timing. There will be some interviews coming with some people involved in sports tech, sports teams, and all the business of sport around that. So I have a few of those recorded. They need to be edited and kind of polished up before going out, but those will be coming in a couple of weeks once I've kind of got a few of these under my belt to kind of keep people informed and up to date with what's happening in the world of sports tech. So thanks for watching and have a great sporting weekend.